Still working our way inside the brain. So we have done the whole cerebrum, the cortex, the central white matter, and then the cerebral nuclei. And now the next things we're going to try to find, we can't really see from a lateral view of the brain. We're going to need to look at a mid-sagittal view, or you can see some of it from a ventral view of the brain. So just to orient, so this was my cerebrum that we've talked about in detail. And then this was some of the white matter that we looked at. This is a little bit more of the white matter. We didn't name that one. And then this area right here is going to be the region that we're looking at called the diencephalon. But I want to orient you a little bit. Remember that this area right here, so if we look back at the ventricles, what we had is this third ventricle was shaped like a chicken head. But remember, a ventricle is a space. So what you have is the third ventricle will close and it will leave a hollow, okay, in the middle. And then the regions that we are going to be talking about as the diencephalon are on the two sides of the third ventricle. So if you look at this picture, the space, that is the chicken head, the space, not the tissue, is the third ventricle, but the things that are lateral to this space, that is the diencephalon. So let me show you where the area is that we're talking about. So the diencephalon includes this area down here with the beak of the chicken, all the way up. Okay, so that whole area is the diencephalon. Let's talk about the three sub areas of the diencephalon. Okay, so the diencephalon is deep within the brain, like between the two halves. Oh, by the way, it's also, not that I would ask you from this view, but to orient yourself to where we were before. So this was the cerebral cortex, this was the white matter, and then these three were the cerebral nuclei. And then close to that third ventricle, right there, that's the diencephalon, this region right there. So that's why this wasn't one of the cerebral nuclei. Okay, so as far as the parts of the diencephalon, there is the thalamus, and the thalamus kind of is this whole region here. There is the hypothalamus, and the hypothalamus, hypo means below, kind of the beak of the chicken. And there is the epithalamus, and the epithalamus is this part that's sticking off the back. So thalamus is in red, hypothalamus is in green, and epithalamus is in blue. But they all three make up the diencephalon. Everything that's part of the diencephalon has the word thalamus in it. So what is the thalamus really? You usually look at it from that, but it's not actually that. The thalamus is actually two little egg-shaped structures that are on either side of the third ventricle. You do not have to know all of that detail about it at all. And there is an interthalamic adhesion that sticks the two sides together that allows them to communicate from one half to the other. The interthalamic adhesion is the eyeball of the chicken. It's actually tissue. It's actually white and gray matter together, more gray than white, strangely. And so if you get in here, this whole region that we're looking at now that we're up close, this is all the diencephalon. But then if you looked lateral, what does the thalamus actually look like? Two little egg-shaped chunks of gray matter with a little connecting portion between them. So just so you know that this could be more complicated and I won't do it, the thalamus is actually made of a whole bunch of individual little named nuclei of gray matter, that each of which has a different function. But let's simplify it and say that the thalamus is really kind of, if I have sensory information that is coming in that says something is happening on my hand, what has to happen in order for me to react to it is I have to get it up through the thalamus, and then the thalamus figures out where it needs to go in my cerebral cortex. So it's kind of like a router, or like way back in those super old movies when they had the operator who's like, you want to talk to this person and stick it in that hole, right? So I want her name to be Thalamus. Her name is Thalamus because she's like, I know what you want. That's the sensory information. I'm going to send it to the brain. So it's the relay station or the router between the sensory input that you're taking in and the right place in the cerebral cortex. Okay, So now the hypothalamus is below the thalamus, and it's the beak part of the chicken. And you can see the hypothalamus is actually a lot more complicated than we're going to look at as well. It is made of a whole bunch of little individual chunks of gray matter, each of which has a separate function. You do not need to know them or even recognize that there are individual ones in there. Series of gray matter nuclei. It's inferior to the thalamus, which is what hypothalamus means. Big picture function of the hypothalamus, homeostasis. It is so important for such an anatomically unimpressive little chunk. It regulates sleep, hunger, thirst, body temperature, some of your emotion and behavior, some of your sex drive, some of your rage responses, some of your autonomic nervous system responses, some of your pituitary gland, all of your pituitary gland secretion, and it produces and secretes 2 of its own hormones. So the big picture understanding of the hypothalamus is that it is all up in physiology's homeostasis business. And then the last part of the diencephalon is just this little part back here. That's called the epithalamus on the thalamus. And it's like kind of like above or beside the hypothalamus, beside the thalamus. And it contains the pineal gland that secretes melatonin. So its simplified function is really, for humans, it's primarily involved in sleep-wake cycles. In animals that have like hibernation or migration cycles, it's involved in those as well. But we're really not very cyclical over the seasons. So day-night sleep-wake cycles is what that one primarily does. Okay, now, on this figure, you should be able to label quite a few things. First of all, this little region right here, this is the optic chiasm right there. The pituitary gland hangs off of the hypothalamus, and that's the little stalk where it hangs off. So this little region that you're looking at is actually the hypothalamus. That's most of what you can see from there. But you should be able to label a decent amount of stuff on there now. You should be able to label the thalamus, the hypothalamus, and the pineal gland. So remember, just look for your chicken head. The head part of the chicken is mostly thalamus. This part, the beak part, is mostly a hypothalamus. And then the little pokey-offy thing across the back and a little bit to the top is the epithalamus that contains the pineal gland. Okay, so now let's move down and do the brainstem. Okay, so now I want to look at where we are in relationship to other stuff again. Okay, so now I want to talk about brainstem. So here's the deal, and it's hard to figure out when you're looking at the brainstem, but we can totally do it. So the brainstem, since we already talked about all of this stuff, let's just go ahead and label it really quickly. So this is the cerebrum. This was white matter. That's actually the corpus callosum, but that's part of the white matter. This part right here, all of this, was the diencephalon. And now everything that is not cerebellum and is still left from here on down, that's all brainstem. Okay, so that's all brainstem, and then the brainstem has some subparts of it. So let us learn the subparts. Okay, so when we want to look at the subparts of the brainstem, so the brainstem pretty much starts here and ends when you go through the foramen magnum and become the spinal cord. But it's got 3 little subparts. This part right here, okay, that has what looks like a little booty on the back right there. That part is called the mesencephalon or the midbrain, and we'll talk about it in a little bit more detail. And then this part, next part down, right here is the pons, okay? And then moving even further down from the pons all the way down until you hit the medulla oblongata. I'm sorry, until you hit the foramen magnum. That is all the medulla oblongata. So in this picture, the pink is the mesencephalon. The yellow is the pons, and then the green is the medulla oblongata. So we're going to look at each of those parts in more detail. Okay, so let's look at the mesencephalon or the midbrain. Okay, so if we get down to the mesencephalon or the midbrain, this is such a weird picture, but I'm going to try to get you to sort of be familiar with it. So this picture, what it is, what you're looking at, is pretty much the brain with the cerebrum taken off. Okay, so these were the two little egg-shaped nuclei that were called the thalamus. Okay, those little breast-looking things are the mammillary bodies, which are part of the hypothalamus. And then I told you, remember, you look like you had a little booty on the back. This is the mesencephalon or the midbrain. So what you are looking at for the midbrain is this region right here where the cerebral aqueduct would be going through. If you find the cerebral aqueduct, yeah, and you know where that is, the midbrain snuggles around it, or the mesencephalon snuggles around it, which is why many people, myself included, do not want to call this the cerebral aqueduct. We prefer the more correct name, which is much harder to spell, which is the mesencephalic aqueduct right there, because it's not in the cerebrum, it's in the mesencephalon. But I won't make you guys learn mesencephalic aqueduct because there's enough terminology here. So again, we are right here or right there, okay? So what you find when you look at the mesencephalon or the midbrain, it's the topmost portion of the brainstem, and it has two little pairs of booties on it. This top one, which would be the right cheek of the top butt, and this would be the right cheek of the bottom butt. Those collectively look like here, top booty, bottom booty. Those are called the superior and inferior colliculi. Collectively, I don't like the term tectal plate. It's not commonly used. Collectively, they are called the corpora, which means body, quadrigemina, which means four twin body. And those are responsible for visual and auditory reflexes. Not like I saw a cat and my occipital lobe and my cerebral cortex said, I identify that as cat. I remember that they liked to chase mice and whatever. This part is like something is coming at me and I see it and I move away. That's a visual reflex. Auditory reflex, to oversimplify, would be like, boom, move your head away. So that's what's going on here. Remember, we're getting more simplified in function, right? No like high level processing once we're this deep down in the brain. And then this guy right here, do you see those? Okay. This part is the hypothalamus, part of the mammillary bodies, which are part of the hypothalamus. These guys right here, or right here, are called the cerebral peduncles, and those are part of the midbrain or mesencephalon as well. Can't see them from this view because they're actually right back there. So the cerebral peduncles. But on this picture, you can kind of tell that like they're striped up and down. So it probably wouldn't surprise you if I told you that those were primarily projection tracts, bringing information to and from the higher lower brain spinal cord. Okay. And then, of course, the mesencephalic or cerebral aqueduct goes through there, right here, right? So if you see the cerebral aqueduct, you're in the mesencephalon or midbrain, okay? And now let's move further down and say, okay, what about this region right here that's just below that? So we're moving down the brainstem. These were the cerebral peduncles. This is the pons. Let's look at it from a different view. Okay. So, mesencephalon, pons, okay. Pons is pretty easy to find because it's got this big projecting part going anterior, and the cerebellum's on the back side, the pons is on the front side when you're looking at it, and it's really easy to find. It's P-O-N-S. Don't put a D in there because that's the easiest one to spell, so spell that one right for sure. Okay, and so if you look at the pons, just look at the striping. You can probably tell that it's got some tracts going left to right. Those would be commissural tracts. It's got some other tracts going top to bottom, so those would be projection tracts. And then it has gray matter in it, and that's what these are trying to represent. You don't have to label those, don't worry. But it kind of tells you what the pons is doing, because you've got a respiratory center. So now we're all the way down in the brainstem. We're dealing primarily with life-sustaining functionality. So the pons primarily is in control of breathing. Okay, it has a friend that will help, which is the medulla oblongata, but breathing. And then all those tracts help to connect higher and lower functions and left to right functions as well. And then last but not least, all the way down here is my medulla oblongata. And the medulla oblongata has some gray matter, white matter. It's got a whole bunch of projection tracts, so that's okay. Remember that with the medulla oblongata, that's also where your tracts cross, so that left side does right side stuff. And what's going on down here in the medulla oblongata is primarily controlling life-sustaining functionality, like helping the pons to control breathing, controlling heart rate, and controlling blood pressure. And it's got a whole bunch of tracts going forward and back, and the tracts cross there. Okay, so the other thing is once you get down here, you'll start seeing cranial nerves attach. So one last thing is, let's put the whole ventricles into context of all this stuff that we've just talked about. So remember again that the lateral ventricles were within the cerebral hemispheres. The third ventricle was between the two halves of the diencephalon. The cerebral aqueduct runs through the mesencephalon or midbrain, yeah? The fourth ventricle is between the cerebellum and the rest of the brainstem, kind of between the cerebellum and the pons, and also a little bit between the cerebellum and the medulla oblongata. So that's where all of those are with reference to the other things. Okay, now we'll stop there and I'll do cerebellum and then a little bit about the cranial nerves, but you kind of have to do those on your own.